All right, so every time I'm working on a slideshow, my husband comes in the room and looks over my shoulder and goes, "Hey, am I in any of those slides?" So I bring him to all my programs, and this was our driveway a few years ago. Usually I show a fishing photo, but here he was, and you know it's coming. They keep saying this is going to be a mild winter, but you know we're going to get that one enormous, 14 inches of snow, maybe. All right, so one of the things I want to mention are frost and freezes. The National Weather Service does not track frost, they track freezes. And these dates, as you know, look how mild this month has been. The dates in the spring and in the fall again are changing a little bit. So once upon a time, May 15th was the last frost. April 20th or so was the last freeze in spring. And so if the temperature gets down to 32 degrees at night, we can have a frost. And it all depends on, is the sky clear? Is there a breeze? Usually if there's a breeze and it's cloudy, the plants are not going to have frost on them. So I like to pay attention in the spring and again in the fall, especially when we expect to see a frost or a freeze, because that tells me I need to get out there and cover up my vegetables, either with polyester, what's called frost cloth or roll cloth, or a cardboard box or a pot. Just put over my plants so they're not going to freeze overnight. So here's an example of frost. Right now they're saying that our first fall frost is usually now average October 18th, but actually it was later than that this year. So pay attention to the weather. Like I said, at end of October, we were still harvesting a lot of vegetables because this has been an unusually long and very mild autumn. So one of the things I want to cover is whether or not to clean up your vegetable garden. There's all of this information online and in books about leave everything in the garden, leave the stems for the insects and everything. That's great if it's a flower garden. Do not do that in your vegetable garden. If you leave everything there standing, there is a better chance there's going to be insect pest eggs or larvae or fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, problems sitting in all the vegetable debris. So clear out your vegetable gardens really well, and by that I mean this. So this is my brother's garden. He's got a very small garden down in Chicago's Mount Greenwood property. This is actually like on an easement. And so this is, again, Chicago backyard, but he's got a lot of space to grow edibles. He has a huge harvest of hot peppers and tomatoes, and he's doing everything either in containers or in a raised bed where he was able to really amend the soil and add compost and things to make the soil not that heavy clay that we have. Our vegetable garden we're altogether different. We're way in the suburbs, surrounded by forest preserve on an acre. And so this vegetable garden we used to dig in the ground, put everything in the ground, but then 2 years ago, we had a horrible spring where it rained and rained and rained. Our lot slopes down, all the water stayed there. We couldn't get in there to seed. And my husband said, "I don't think I want to do this anymore." And I was like, "What? Come on." So I bought 6 huge animal troughs from Tractor Supply, and some friends that are landscapers built the 2 raised beds. This eliminated my problem of water. You don't want water. You don't want to be gardening in the ground in a low, wet area in the spring. And if that's the case in your backyard, I would consider raised bed or containers. So here's one of the reasons I like to clear out the vegetable garden. Sawflies, insect eggs, all that debris that's laying there is just like a condo for bugs and diseases. This is P. Allen Smith's garden down in Arkansas, and it was the fall. And I love this is all asparagus, that beautiful ferny asparagus. We used to have a 15-year-old asparagus patch, and I used to leave the beautiful fronds there in the vegetable garden. And then one spring I came out and I'm like, "Where's all the asparagus?" And I had a big problem because I didn't clear that out. We had asparagus beetles. They lay their eggs, they overwinter in all those asparagus, the debris in the garden, and so then I was surprised to see all the larvae and the beetles. They're eating all the foliage, they're damaging the roots, and so that's just another reason, clear out your vegetable garden now, get rid of everything. Any questions about that? Okay, there's no test. I taught this as a over 2 hour class on Saturday at the Botanic Garden. Yes?
When you say clean it out really good, are you wanting us to remove all the roots out and everything for our vegetables?
So should we remove the roots and everything? If you're growing in the ground, you don't have to do that, but I would cut everything to the ground. Like your tomato stems are gonna be like an inch or two across. If you don't wanna dig it out and add some compost over for the winter, just cut it to the ground. If the plants weren't diseased, throw them in the compost pile. If they were diseased, mildewed, whatever, bacterial, wilt on your tomato plants, those need to go in the trash. So, yes?
What about chipping your vegetables at the end of the after you're done?
So I didn't catch the first part. What about,
Chipping.
oh, you mean like shredding them up?
Yes.
At the end of the year? To put them on top, to top dress the garden? You could do that as long as, but again, like with the asparagus beetles, that larva that was on there, I would still clean that all out. So the other thing is if they go into the compost pile and they were healthy, they'll decompose and then you're going to have some really nice soil. So the one thing I want to say before you run out and start ordering seeds or buying seeds or get some free seeds here in the seed library, think about your soil. If you don't have good soil, you're not going to have great produce. And I'm assuming all of you like to cook and you're growing your own organic vegetables and herbs. So the soil is really important. How many of you have had a soil test for your garden? Soil test? Nobody. Okay. That's sort of like taking a blood test. You can buy soil tests at the big box stores, at garden centers. University of Illinois Extension Service has got a website with a list of soil labs. And why that's important to me, if you're gardening around an older home or a garage where there may have been lead paint, you want to have your soil tested for heavy metals. You don't want to be growing edibles where there might be lead in the soil. The other thing is a soil test, even if you go to Menards and get an inexpensive one, it's going to tell you what's there and what's missing. Like a blood test, if you're deficient in vitamin D, you're going to have some health issues. And so this way you're not spending money on fertilizer you might not need and dumping things in there. So soil test is like a basic line that tells you how healthy is your soil before you start buying expensive vegetables and so on, seeds and planting them. This was in a garden down in Joliet years ago. This fellow was a retired agricultural chemist. He just kept adding compost, his own compost to the soil. This month in May was extremely wet. And you know how when you pick up clay and it's wet, you can roll it into a cigar? His didn't do that because there was so much organic matter in there, so much compost added to it. It just crumbled away really nicely. So here, you can get 40 tests. This was at a garden center. This is, I'll call it the over-the-counter soil test. It's going to tell you just the very basic, how much nitrogen is there, phosphorus, potash, all of those things, those three main things are important for leafy greens, nitrogen, how much nitrogen is going to pump out those cucumber leaves. The phosphorus and potash help to establish the roots, and that middle number, for example, let me just back up for a second. When you buy, let's say, water-soluble fertilizer and it says 10, 10, 10 on there, that's considered an all-purpose fertilizer, a general fertilizer. And so these things for flower formation, for root growth, for leafy greens. It's going to tell you how much nitrogen, how much phosphorus, how much potash is in your soil. And then you can adjust the fertilizers as needed. How many here have a compost pile? How many are composting? Good, excellent. Yay, I'm happy to hear that because, when we throw stuff away, there is no way. When you think about the garbage, when you throw something away, it stays on the planet. So I try to take all of our vegetable scraps from the kitchen, all of that goes into the compost pile. So you can have a bin like this that's enclosed. These are just from different gardeners in the western suburbs, different types of bins if you want to kind of keep things contained, so to speak. But this was at a school up in Evanston. There's all of these, if you've got a small garden, you don't need a giant compost pile. For that matter, you could use a garbage can with a lot of small holes poked into it and a lid to keep the whatever, raccoons, squirrels, chipmunks out. And put your vegetable scraps, your garden debris in there. Once in a while, put some water in, and as long as there's some holes in that can, that'll allow for air to come in. The other thing is if you've got a dark garbage can, that's going to heat up and cook that compost a lot faster. So all kinds of ways to compost. That on the right, that's some compost we've got 2 giant open pits way in the back of our garden. And so within a year, it's nice and crumbly. Yes?
I have one of those little ones.
Yes.
I'm not sure what to empty it out. I've had it for about 2 years, and that stuff slowly seems to be reducing.
It's not, so in your tumbling composter, it's not breaking down? It doesn't look like this yet?
No.
Okay, it probably is not getting hot enough, but usually if those are in sun, and now that we're going in winter, it's not going to heat up, but in the summer, in a closed container, it should be getting to like 140 degrees or more. But I would add a little bit of water. You may have too much of one ingredient, like too much green. If you've got some shredded paper, throw that in there, the carbon. I like to mix that up. I run our credit card statements, bank statements. I just run those through the shredder right into, I have a tumbler as well. You never have enough compost, but it should look, the finished product's going to have some twigs and things in there. It should look like that picture on the right. How about potting mixes for containers? After COVID, or actually during COVID, I remember I went into Menards, I couldn't find a hose. The seeds were almost all gone. I've never seen anything like that. And all the potting mixes were gone. All those bags of potting mix. And since then, it seems like the prices have gone up $3 or $4 a bag. It's just crazy. So there's all sorts of soil-less potting mixes. They've got shredded bark, sphagnum peat moss, things like that, but no soil. You're paying more for that. Sometimes they've got granular fertilizer in there. I buy what's on sale. I buy, and then if I find a product that I really like, when it's on sale, I'll go and buy a few more bags of that. And so I'll use these for containers. I do a lot of edibles in containers closer to the house. On the left-hand side, those little white and gray bits in there are vermiculite and perlite. You're paying a little bit more for that because these are minerals. They've been mined, they've been heated, they've been ground up, and all they do is create little air pockets around the roots of the plants so that the roots aren't, if you've ever gardened in clay and it's wet, it's compacted, those roots need some space where they can collect and move through the soil and get oxygen, get nutrients, get water. So you're paying a little bit more for product with perlite and vermiculite. Here's another one, Pro Mix. Home Depot, I think, has this. I know Menards does. Mycorrhizae is a fungus. They include that in there. It helps. It's a fungus that attaches to the plant roots, helps the plants take up nutrients. You're paying a little bit more for this. These are all soilless. If you are growing in the ground, your plant's directly in the ground, and you've got heavy clay, I would encourage you, even this fall, put down the compost, put down some bags of compost. You can work these products into the soil, and it's going to help break it up a little bit. So you're not going to have that kind of soil where you could make pottery out of it. It's so thick and heavy. I will say, when you're working with bags of soilless potting mix, or vermiculite, or perlite, or mulch for that matter, wear a mask. Because all those fine sphagnum peat moss fibers, when you open the bag, are flying around. You really don't want those going into your lungs. When I open a bag of soilless potting mix, I right away pour some water in there so that it's not, 4 billion little hairs flying out and into your nose. So same with these products. Can you reuse the potting mix? Absolutely, unless you're growing, for example, let's say you had a heirloom tomato that had blight and the whole plant was just bad, and, shriveled up, wilted, etc. I probably wouldn't use the same potting mix in a container in which I grew a diseased tomato. In that case, I would empty that container out. This is in my brother's backyard. That root system was from a tomato plant. Huge, great big stem. He's raked away all the debris, took the root ball out of there, and now he can reuse that potting mix, but he's going to have to add either compost or granular fertilizer because whatever was in there as a nutrient was all used up. But don't think you have to throw these mixes out. They're expensive every year when you buy, it could be anywhere from $7 to $12 a bag. So I would encourage you to repurpose those. How many are growing in containers? Okay, yeah, great. So there's a million different containers out there. There's so many ways I could spend your money. You could buy these, they're not cheap. These are 15-gallon fiber pots. Oftentimes they're made out of felt. 15 gallons is usually what is considered the right size for big plants like tomatoes and peppers and bush squash. On the other hand, I've had people tell me they grow, the big buckets at Menards and Home Depot, the big white 5-gallon buckets, that they have no problem growing tomatoes or potatoes or whatever in there as long as they're drainage holes. What I will say about these fiber pots, at the end of the season, you dump them out if you want to get rid of the root ball and everything into the compost pile. Wash them really good, dry them in the sun, fold them up, put them away if you don't want to leave them out there. And then you'll get a few more seasons out of them. Like I said, this is a Gardner and LaGrange. These are expensive, and I would take care of them at the end of the season, clean them out, wash them, dry them, fold them up, and put them away. Because eventually the sun's UV rays are going to kind of damage these expensive flexible pots. You can get these. I think these are 15 or 17 gallon. They're at Target. I'm trying to think what the other store. Walmart, Myers. Large, big tubs with 2 handles on them. And in my brother's garden, you would just drill the holes in there. And in that amount of space, instead of growing in the ground, he can control the soil that the plants are going into. And so all of his tomato plants are in there. They're staked. They actually get some shade in the afternoon. The plants didn't read the book. They think they need to be in sun 10 hours a day in June, but they actually get a little bit of shade in the afternoon. And then what about your side yard? If you own a house, you're paying taxes on those side yards. Even if it's kind of shady there, you can grow leafy greens in the shade. You can grow kale, spinach, Asian greens, some types of cabbages, basil, all of those will thrive, even with just a couple hours of sunlight. So it's just another way of looking at using what space you have to grow edibles. Here's a real simple raised bed. You don't need wood or stone or plastic or anything else. This gardener simply took the soil that is now the pathway and mounded it up. And just another example of a raised bed. Raised beds, why do a raised bed? They warm up faster in the spring and they drain quickly. So if you've got an area that's wet, you might want to think about that, building that soil up. So you've got a raised bed. And this is in a garden they're growing some spring. They've got radishes in there, red mustard, all the leafy greens that you can start growing in April in your garden. So. All right, so before we get to the plants, I just want to say, grow what you like to eat. We were talking earlier before you all came in about growing what you like to eat. And grow the things that you like to cook with and grow the things that are expensive. I am not going to grow russet potatoes that are 99 cents a pound at Jewel when I can grow the real delicacies, the little Russian bananas, French fingerling, purple potatoes. You know, if you go to Trader Joe's, you're going to take out a home equity loan to buy a few bags of these specialty baby potatoes and carrots and so on. So look at things that are costly but taste good and that you like to cook with and eat. And one of the places I like to visit are the farmers markets to talk to the growers to see how they like to prepare their produce. And, you know, to look at different varieties that they're growing. At the Jewel, you're going to find green zucchini and yellow zucchini. There's not going to be this wide offering of different types, patty pan squash and all these other things. You have the opportunity over the winter to plan what you want to have given the amount of space you have. So in your handout, I talk about some of the basics, location and, you know, seed sowing and things like that. But I want to talk about in the spring. We don't often think about sowing seeds in April. How many start their seeds in April, or indoors or outside? Say that again. February you start. You are a glutton for punishment. Get those lights out, sunny windows. Yeah, that's excellent. February. I'm going to come over to your place in February, see what you're sowing. So, yeah, you know, if you're really into it and depending on what you're growing, you could start sowing seeds in February. The soonest that we can really start planting the warm season vegetables is mid-May. But I'm going to back up because April and May, those are the times when you can start growing lettuce, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, all of these interesting bok choy leafy greens for the cool season, so that by the time you're ready to put your tomatoes and beans in, the cool season crops are done. They're going to be bitter. Lettuce by June is going to start to taste bitter. So then those spots where you're growing the cool season vegetables can be replaced with beans, zucchini, tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, all of those things. So I don't look at just Memorial Day, I'm going to start planting tomatoes, and in September, I'm going to pull them all out. I'm thinking about what can I start planting in April, May 15th, our last typical frost date. That's kind of a key date, somewhere in the middle of May, although Mother Nature has not been listening to Tom Skilling. You know, and I'll tell you, many, many years ago, it was a very warm April. This is going back a long time ago. Super warm April, and I had styrofoam cups all over the house with very leggy tomato plants, and each cup had different names on it. I was so sick of looking at these. I thought, I'm going to get these out. We're not going to have a frost. So right at the end of April, the first couple of days of May, I put them all in that low area vegetable garden where all the cold air collects. And I didn't listen to Tom Skilling the night before, and we had a snow shower on May 6th. Many years ago, and it wiped out every single plant. When I got home from work, I was like, oh, if I'd only waited another week, or if I'd listened to the weather and covered them up, I would have saved that crop. And again, on the back side of your handout, there's a list of dates when you can start sowing again the cool season greens in late summer for fall harvest. So you can have something growing from April and harvesting in late April, early May, all the way through November. So I mentioned about the last freeze. We could still have a freeze the week of the April 20th. We could have a freeze, but we could have a frost up until May 15th. So just in a nutshell, keep your eye on the weather forecast. And like I said, frost right up until the week of May 15th. In October, our first freezes tend to come later, like the end of October. And this happened very late this year. So it's all about listening to the weather forecast. If you had Swiss chard growing in your garden this past month and it dipped down it dipped down to 28 in Joliet. People that covered up their Swiss chard were fine. Those plants the next day, when they took the cardboard boxes or the cloth off, they were ready to go as soon as the sun came out. So again, extending that harvest all the way into November. The other thing I want to mention, you start your seeds, this gentleman here, in February. February. Are you growing tomatoes, peppers?
Start cauliflower, broccoli.
Cauliflower, okay, broccoli.
Cultivar stuff, you get it in April, and, it stays full, and, I get
Right.
it, I get it.
So he's starting the seeds in February of things like cool crops like cauliflower. You could start cabbage too then. So what you want to do for those that are new to seed starting, and do check out the seed library here. So here, French breakfast radishes, those from the time they sprout to the time you're pulling them out in April, 28 days. So the seed, now talk about seed packages in a minute, but I want you to see this. So let's see here. Lettuce, let me just walk around here. I want to show you on here. There's a company called Johnny'sSeeds.com, great company. You don't have to buy from them, but look at their website, Johnny'sSeeds.com. They have a germination chart, soil germination. And this is more important to me than the calendar, because remember in April, I think March, we had a 70-plus degree day, and then April, we had many 70-degree days. That top inch of soil where you're sprinkling those lettuce or spinach seeds was already up to 65 or 70. It's top inch of soil. So I'll talk about soil thermometers in a minute. But lettuce will start germinating when the soil temperature, the top layer of soil, is only in the 40s. So you could be sowing in a pot or a window box or in the ground leaf lettuce, and 7 days or so it's going to germinate, and then within 3 weeks we'll be cutting it and harvesting it. But what happens now, let's say that my soil has warmed up at top edge. I've sowed the seeds, and now they germinated, little tiny seedlings have germinated, and they're growing to an inch or so, and now WGN says it's going to be 28 degrees tonight. I'm going to go out and cover those. It's April, we could have a freeze or frost, so I'm going to cover those and protect them until the sun comes out the next day, and then I'm going to take that off. I'll take the covering away. But you could still have these leafy greens growing in your garden in April, at least starting them, because again, by June, that lettuce is going to be done. It's going to be bitter by then. Let me just go back for 1 second. So let's say you're growing, let's say you're going to grow tomatoes. If it takes, I'll use this as an example. If it takes about a week for a tomato seed to germinate, and then you've got a little seedling, our last average frost day before that tomato can actually go outside is the middle of May. So I look back a month. It's going to take about a week to germinate. Then indoors, I have 3 more weeks to hold that plant inside. Does that make sense? If you have questions after this, you're always welcome to text me, email me, call. So this was at, I think this was a Menards or Home Depot one April. They got all their tomato plants in. It's early April, and they were not cheap. 1 or 2 gallon pots with a little trellis. And I don't know if they were 12 or 20 bucks, I don't remember, but I thought for a new gardener to take that home, and imagine, we have 70-degree days in April, and then they set it outside and forget about it. There's a good chance later in April we could have a freeze. So you're almost doing yourself a disservice buying a giant tomato plant like that, spending a lot of money when you can get a little 6-pack for like $2 and grow them indoors. Have them by a sunny window or under a light. Put them in a larger pot. So it's too early. Oftentimes, these plants suffer by going outside or hanging around inside, these big plants that grew in a greenhouse. So here, these are soil thermometers. How many here have a soil thermometer? Nobody. Okay, so you can get these. You don't need a fancy digital thermometer, but if you've got the money, you can spend it on that. These are, for example, they're just about 8 inches long, like the size of a spoon. This is the head of one type. You can get these online or at some of the garden centers. And this is telling you the minimum top inch of soil. The broccoli needs 50 degrees top inches of soil to germinate. Same thing with celery, 65 degrees for pumpkin and squash. The main thing is you take the bottom, you do your side of the thermometer, that 5-inch stainless steel. All you do is put that in the top of the soil. It's going to tell you what the temperature is. And likely, if it was 70 degrees during the day in April, it's going to go down in the 40s at nighttime. So once those greens, like I said, germinate, they're growing, cover them up at night if the temperatures dip below 40. But the soil thermometer is one of the best tools you can use for spring planting of vegetables. $10 to $12 or so for one of these little, I'll call them analog or manual devices. So, seeds can germinate, especially lettuce seeds. They can germinate when the soil is in the 40s. But once it stays in the 70s, the germination rate drops very quickly for cool season greens. So sooner you get them in the ground in the spring, the better. This was a repurposed wheelbarrow. It's got some drainage holes in the bottom. I put a lot of nice soilless potting mix. I added a bag of compost, mixed it up. I had some leftover leafy green lettuce, the type, not a heading lettuce, but one that you could just keep cutting. I just broadcast those seeds in the wheelbarrow, pressed it down, it was moistened, and they germinated like within 7 days, and I had 3 or 4 weeks of cutting lettuce that I could just keep cutting it, and when it was finished, I put annuals and herbs in this. So there's all kinds of things you can do in April. Here, spinach, you could be sowing spinach seeds in April. And like I said, if it germinates and it gets real cold at night, just cover it up, or if you've got a container or window box, move it in the garage just overnight. Peas are another one. This is early season crop. Who grows peas here? Yeah, this is another, only a few people. This is another great crop early in the season. By the end of June, you're pulling the vines and everything out. Very nutritious, a lot of fiber. You can either use them on a salad or stir fry, depending on the types. They do need support, so I've grown these in large containers with a little trellis in there. And here's a few others. This is lettuce lettuce is on the left. It's not kale. We have a little unheated greenhouse, and I would start them in there. Kale's another one. In April, you can be sowing those seeds now. Not now, but in the spring. Swiss chard. When you go to the grocery store and you are in the produce aisle and you've got these, big, big leaves of Swiss chard, they're kind of tattered. Who knows how long they've been laying there or when they were harvested. But fresh Swiss chard is loaded with vitamins and fiber. This is out of the botanic garden. I think this one's called peppermint. There's a lot of different types, green with white stems, neon-colored stems. And when I think about what I'm growing to eat, I think about how is this going to look on the plate? Because we eat with our eyes first. If it doesn't look appetizing or colorful and doesn't taste good, we're not going to like it. So anyway, these big Swiss chard leaves, what I would do when they're generally better when you harvest them small, they're super tender. But with these large leaves, I fold them in half, cut away that stem, dice it up really good, and I will saute that with onions and garlic. And then later I might add the leaves, and all of that becomes the base for a soup. So all kinds of things. I don't like to let anything to go to waste. So should you sow seeds or buy plants? If you've got a really small garden, let's say, you're only doing a handful of containers, you're better off just to buy, for example, a little 6-pack of tomatoes or a 6-pack of pepper plants. rather than buying, a package of seeds that might have 100 tomato seeds, unless you're going to share them with friends. And some things are just simply too difficult to start from seeds. I never start rosemary or lavender, some of the woody herbs, I don't do those from seeds. But, depending on what garden center you're near, they may have a number of different types of tomatoes that you want to buy. Instead of buying, let's say you want 6 different tomatoes, an heirloom Brandywine and a celebrity and a beefsteak. Then you can just buy the individual plants. You're not spending money on 6 different packets of seeds, and it ends up being very expensive, and you're not going to use them. So that's one thing. Weigh whether or not the seeds are going to be cheaper and you're going to use them, or if you just need to buy the plants. It is fun sowing the seeds, though. Buy the seeds at the end of the season. The only seeds that really go bad within a year or so are those in the onion family. So onion, leeks, those seeds only are good for about a year or 2 tops. Most other ones, I started bush bean seeds that were 15 years old. My husband's like, I'm not going to plant those. So I put them on a wet paper towel, put them in a Ziploc bag. This was in early May, and put them in the sun, and they sprouted. So we just took the sprouted seeds and planted them. And I know other people have had very old seeds of tomato plants, and they germinated. I never throw the seeds out. I like to see how long they'll last. So here, like I said, I'm not going to start a rosemary from seed. Bonnie's has a really good line. They sell at all the big box stores now. If you can get, instead of $8, you can go to the jewel produce section and buy a little plant of rosemary. I like to grow these in containers, and then I bring them in the fall. But here, this is $8, and there might be 4 different types of sort of heading lettuce, very pretty red, green, mixed colors. You're paying $8 for basically 4 plants. I would take that $8 and buy 2 packages of seeds, and now you're going to have hundreds of lettuce seeds. So that's what I mean about, should I buy it as a transplant or sow it from seed? These are all leftover seeds. One year I grew these, yes.
Yeah, amongst the other things, it's like I grow the Swiss chard in the wintertime in the house.
Oh, excellent. Did everybody hear that?
That and
Yeah.
oregano.
So, and the oregano's,
Big pack.
excellent. We're going to go to your house for dinner tomorrow. Nice bowl of soup. Okay, so he brought his oregano indoors, wintering it over indoors, and he's growing Swiss chard. That's another thing. You could do that indoors on a kind of bright, sunny window. Yeah, definitely sunny. You could be doing lettuce indoors right now, too. Or an under-the-cabinet LED light that you can leave on for 12 hours in your kitchen and have those lettuce leaves about 3 inches away from that light. These are seeds that I hadn't used. Simpson Elite lettuce. Like I said, there's that potting mix. It's in the wheelbarrow. I moistened it in the spring. In April, sowed the seeds of these, and they're in part shade. There's lettuce and spinach in there, and these seeds are not new. Lettuce seeds last for several years, and I don't always use the entire packet in 1 year. So, and here again, these are just on the upper left seeds, lettuce. I think this is deer tongue lettuce, leafy greens. When they get to be 3 or 4 inches tall, you cut them, use them in a salad, and the plants will re-sprout till the weather gets hot. Then they want to flower, and they're bitter, and they're done. Here's another way of doing that. If you start the seeds indoors, you want to try some really different types of beautiful Merlot lettuce, almost like a butter crunch. Look at how those leaves are going to look on the plate. You can transplant those out, start them inside and transplant them into the garden. This gardener up in Wisconsin was using hay and pine needles and letting each plant grow into a sort of a loose leaf head lettuce. I like to use as much of the space as possible and cram all my lettuce together so I can go in there and cut it. But it's just really beautiful leaf lettuce that you can grow in April. So here, radish is the fastest crop you can grow. Now out there, they've got French breakfast radish, It says 21 days to maturity. So these are things you have to look at on the seed packet. 21 days means from the time that plant germinated and you've got the first set of real leaves. So I start planning, I'll take the soil thermometer. How warm is my soil? Sow the lettuce seeds. Then I know from the time they germinate, in 3 weeks, you have a harvest. It's not the hot weather that makes those radishes kind of like woody and peppery tasting. It's the longer daylight. So the sooner you can get those seeds in the ground in April and start growing the radishes, the better they'll be. And if you harvest them like beets when they're small, baby vegetables, it costs an arm and leg, they're going to be a lot more tender. So, and this is not the typical red French breakfast radish that you're looking at. This one is called Easter egg, and the seed packet has got seeds of red, pink, and white radishes in there. So that's kind of fun. And here's another one. I never grow the long carrots in our garden because our soil 8 inches down is typically not great, doesn't drain well. So I look for the shorter carrots. This one that came out in the past 15 years or so. It's called Thumbelina. Great, and for kids or grandchildren, what a great little snacking radish. Round, but they're Parisian carrots too, 3 to 4 inches long, super tender. Up at the Botanic Garden, in the vegetable garden, to make use of the soil, they have the larger leaves in this picture are radishes, and the ferny ones are the carrots. The radishes will be ready in 28 days. They're going to go in there and pull all those radishes out. Now they've cultivated the soil all around the carrots by doing that. And then the carrots will be ready a couple of weeks after that. But make the most of your soil instead of having plants 2 feet apart, especially if you've got bare soil, because every weed seed is going to blow in there and germinate. So I like to cover as much of my vegetable area as possible. So how much light do you have? As I mentioned before, if you're growing leafy greens and you only have a few hours of direct sunlight, April and May, you're good to go. But come middle to end of May, you're growing peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, zucchini, cucumber. You need at least 6, preferably 8 hours of sunlight. So think about May, June, we're getting to the longest amount of sunlight during the year, June 21st. There's 12 hours of sunlight. So if you've got a spot and the sun is more intense in June, like right now it's lower in the sky, the sun is weaker, but June 21st, it's beating down on the vegetable garden. So things like beans, tomatoes, squash, they all need at least 6 hours, a spot that's got at least 6 hours. How many are growing potatoes? Anybody here? This is a plant. If you like to cook and you like to garden, I would think about growing a few pots of potatoes this year. You don't have to do them in the ground. You know that if you've left potatoes in the pantry or wherever, after a while they look like this on the left. You forgot about them. Now all those, they're called eyes. They've got a little sprout. Those sprouts turn into many stems and then into green leaves. So can you take a sprouting potato that you bought at the Jewel and plant it? You could, but oftentimes the growers spray these to keep them from sprouting. They're sprayed with something to prevent them from sprouting, but after a while, the plant does what it wants to do. That tuber is going to sprout. In the past, I've bought, they're called seed potatoes. You can get them at the big box stores, you can get them online, you can get them at better garden centers, and I look for the ones that I can't find in the grocery store. So things like French fingerlings, Russian banana, little red or purple majesty, things that are a little bit different. And in large containers, I will drill some holes in the bottom, the ones on the right here. Some like that, first of all, when I buy the seed potatoes, I will cut them and let them sort of callus for a day or two. And you can see these stems of this purple majesty. The stems are purple instead of green. Those are going to create leaves and so on once they're in the ground. So now they've sprouted in these dish pans. They've sprouted. I've put some soil in the bottom of a very large container. I set these seed potatoes in there with the stems facing up. And then I cover them with a little more soil. They are going to keep filling that big pot like this right up through the end of the summer. All those potatoes are going to be, all those spuds in there are going to be growing. There's going to be a lot of foliage and flowers. And once the plants flower and the foliage starts to sort of turn yellowish, dries up, I know that the potatoes are ready. And so these are some of the harvests that we've had: yellow potatoes, purple potatoes, things that, I like to take a brush and I brush all the dirt off. I let them dry on some newspaper. I brush that off really well. You could wash them, but instead of washing them, I make sure they're super clean. They go on the grill. I may slice them up, put a little oil on them. They go in a foil packet on the grill. And you can't get fresher potatoes than what you grow yourself. So if you had for example, a 15-gallon big pot like that, you could have a huge harvest by the end of the summer. This was up at the Botanic Garden, Lisa. They are growing their potatoes in trenches. So there's they create a big V shape going down at least 14 inches. They put those little seed potatoes in there with the stems facing up, and they start covering the stems. As soon as the stems come up and through the next layer, they keep covering them until the soil is all together even, and by the end of the harvest, they're pulling out these really beautiful fresh potatoes. So I will talk about green onions. Anybody have questions about potatoes? Yes.
I've seen a trend online now of people planting them in cardboard boxes, since we get so many of those.
Yeah.
Is that like a good idea?
So the question is, could you plant them in a cardboard box? You could plant in a cardboard box. I don't know what these boxes are treated with, but let's say you have a cardboard box. You just poke a couple of holes. You're going to have some space sometimes around the bottoms, but I would make sure there's some drainage holes. I'd fill it with the potting mix, put the seed potatoes, the same thing. And by the end of the season, that's going to be rotted. So hopefully it's thick enough cardboard that it's not going to rot during the summer from watering or whatever. But yeah, you could do that.
And I've also been told to mix a bit of sand in with dirt for potatoes specifically, because they like
Yeah.
looser soil.
So in this picture here at the Botanic Garden, I don't know if you can see this, but there is sand in here. That's a fine, it's like a recipe. You don't want to put too much sand in there. It's because it's going to drain, the water's going to drain way too fast. Like if you put, let's say you have let me think for a second. I would put a few cups of sand. I wouldn't make half of it sand, but there is. You can see it's called a sandy loam. They put sand in there. A bag of not play sand, which is real fine, but the coarser sand is what I would use. So scallions in the spring, you can either buy a package of seeds or buy, at the grocery store, you can get a little pot that's got probably 50 plants in there, and then cut it apart and sow the seeds like this. These are for green onions more so than for the bulbing onions. And I think in the past, planting these individual sprouted onions is like planting hair. So you got to be careful when you're putting it in the ground. But here in this trench, this way they can mound the soil up around the roots. Now you get more of a white stem that will form in the soil. Or you could buy these dried onion sets. Those are handy for scallions. I never really get any kind of a big onion out of those, but I will plant them either in the wheelbarrow or in pots. I might plant them alongside tomato plants. I'll plant them if I've got a lot left over, like bumper to bumper, and then I'll harvest every other one for green onions. If you can, harvest them when they're short, like maybe 6 or 8 inches. That's actually when they're the most tender. If you wait till these green onions are 12 inches or 14, like they are in the lower left, they're going to taste a lot more sulfury and oniony. So smaller is better. And then there's all sorts of other, I think it's kind of hard to get a big bulbing onion in our climate here. Even at the Botanic Garden, their Walla Walla onions, which grow great in the south, are only about 2 inches or so, 2 to 2.5 inches wide. Here, and you can see here, this is white white sweet Spanish onion up at the Botanic Garden. It's not huge. And once these are getting ready for harvest, once the leaves start to die down, the shoulders of the onion have pushed up above the soil, they're going to be ready for harvest soon. And once you get them out of the ground, you want to place them on some newspaper or in a cardboard box out of the rain. You let them dry a little bit before you bring them in and cut the leaves out. So if I had a limited amount of space, instead of growing onions, I would grow shallots. These are the rich man's onion because they're so expensive in the store, great mild taste. These get planted in May. So if you can either order them online or get them in a garden center, but what I like to do is find like a family grocery store. We have Caputo's, there's Pete's Market, other smaller chain stores, and I go to the produce department and just get like a pound of really nice large shallots. And each clove, this was in our garden years ago, I set each clove about 1 inch deep and about 4 inches apart. So by June, they've got all of this foliage, and I can go in there, clip some of the scallion leaves, use them on a salad or in a soup or in a stew. But by the end of the summer, each of those cloves has turned into 4 or more, like it's like a head of garlic. You plant the one clove, and now you've got, by the end of the season, a large head of garlic. These will form several cloves together. And like I said, if you've got limited space, this is what I would grow instead of onions because onions are so inexpensive at the grocery store. Cabbage is another one in this early times. I know this gentleman said he starts cabbage from seeds. I usually buy the transplants. You can get them just about anywhere, garden centers, big box stores. But what I do is once I get these in the ground, I cover them with like an insect barrier, either a real fine cloth, because you know those white cabbage butterflies, moths that are flying around, they were out in February. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was winter, it was a real warm day. I didn't know where this thing came from, flying around February, early March. And I just saw one a week ago. So they are such a pest. If you've got cabbage or even bok choy, sometimes Swiss chard, anything in the cabbage family, they go after. So I covered these with these lightweight insect repellent or insect barrier cloths. The water can get in, the sun can get in. Cabbage doesn't need to flower. It's not like we need a pollinator. But you can still see there's some holes on these cabbages there. Pardon? You can get them online, like either through Johnny's Seeds. Sometimes the big box stores have them, but you have to look for the ones that are really fine mesh where they can't get through there. And they've got to be suspended over the crop, and they can't sit on the cabbage because then the butterfly can just come and lay its egg right on there. You'll see a lot of green caterpillars. They were really bad this year. Any of the Chinese cabbages, I thought this was so clever. It's in a window box. This gardener took 4 transplants, put them in a nice potting mix. You know, they could have a little bit of shade in the afternoon, but they used twine, and so they're blanching the inside of that cabbage. It's going to be nice and tender if you want to stir fry with it, use it raw. So another one for spring, beets. Another one you could be sowing in April, and instead of waiting till they're the size of baseballs, harvest them when they're little. And don't just buy the Detroit red beets. There's so many beautiful other ones. Golden beets, they all taste the same to me. I think if you had a blindfold on, you couldn't tell the difference between gold and the red beets. Choja beets are red and white inside. Like I said, grow something that you like to eat and that looks good on the plate. So this is super easy. The leaves are nutritious. They can be used in a salad. I wouldn't cut all the leaves. I'd just take a few off each plant. That's what my English mother used to do. Take a few leaves off of each plant, sprinkle them on a salad. You can sprinkle them on a soup. Asian greens, bok choy, very expensive again if you're going to Whole Foods or whatever. Very easy to grow from seed in the spring and again at the end of July, early August. Okay, so by May 15th or later, this is when I start to do all the warm season. I'll start sowing seeds of the beans and the cucumbers. If I'm growing pumpkins, I will sow those seeds then. Zucchini. I'll start transplanting if I've got tomato transplants, peppers, and so on. Those will go in after May 15th. If it looks like it's going to be real cold, as we go through May, I will cover them up at night. That hasn't happened recently. So let's say you've started things indoors. My brother starts a lot of things under seeds, under lights. So he's got specialty pepper plants. He starts them in a seed tray, then he transplants them, moves them up into another 4-inch pot. By the time they're ready to go out in May, the root ball looks like this. But the May temperatures can fluctuate back and forth. So those plants go outside for a few hours. Like in early May, he'll put the plants outside for a few hours during the day in a protected spot to harden them off. If you buy plants, let's say tomato plants from the garden center, and you bring them home, they've grown in a greenhouse, then they were in the big box store, then they were sat on your kitchen counter for a while, now you just stick them right in the ground. They haven't been subjected to the sun, so those leaves that are tender are going to start turning white. You're actually going to set the plants back. So this way, it gets them, hardening off gets them acclimated to the changing spring weather. So real quick about tomatoes, this is something a lot of us don't think about there, but tomatoes have two different growth patterns. They're either indeterminate, where you put the plant in the ground, and if it's healthy, by the end of the season, it could be 8 feet tall. It's going to keep growing, it's going to have flowers, unripe fruit, ripe fruit, all on the same plant. Grow and grow and grow. Or determinate tomatoes, which grow, if they reach a certain stage, they produce all their fruits over about 2 weeks. And then the plant kind of starts to shut down after that. So why is that important? If you like to can, you might, or freeze your tomatoes, I would look for the determinate bushy types where I can harvest everything at once, then maybe pull the plants out and start some beans in their place. Or if you want cherry tomatoes, for example, they are indeterminate. They're going to keep growing and growing. They're going to need a support. So here at the Botanic Garden, they are on these very pretty obelisks in the garden here, and you can see it's indeterminate. Is it 9 o'clock? Oh my God, I better step on the spider fruit. Here's an indeterminate tomato. So there's about 4 or 5 vines. We haven't really proved anything. Here's red tomatoes. There's flowers. Bless you. So that's something to think about. If you're growing indeterminate tomatoes, they're going to need some sort of support. Beefsteak, this is why it's helpful to have a really good catalog. If you look online, you don't have to order from the company, but Territorial Seed, Johnny's Seeds, it's going to tell you if the tomato plant is indeterminate or determinate. There are beefsteak varieties, the great big tomatoes you'd use on a hamburger. They can be indeterminate. Sometimes, depending on the cultivar, it might say semi-determinate, so they're not quite a bush, but they're not going to get 8 feet tall. So pay attention to the description. Bush beefsteak here, this one is determinate. It's going to produce most of its fruit over 2 weeks. And you can harvest whatever you need, and then the plant's going to really kind of start to shut down. This is an heirloom. This is indeterminate. Brandywine, great flavor, needs support. Pear and cherry tomatoes, those are indeterminate for the most part. So what about suckers? There's a lot of misinformation about suckers. If you don't want 40 different stems coming up from your tomatoes, then you want to go in between the leaf axil and the stem and share. A sucker, all a sucker is another branch that's going to have flowers and fruit. So now you could have, who knows, 50 different stems coming up if you didn't train them, and that's okay. If you want more fruits, they're going to be a little bit smaller, you could leave all the suckers as long as you're staking that tomato upright so you can see where the fruits are and see if there's any insects. Should you let them stake? Should you stake them or let them sprawl? You had a question, right?
So you're saying that the indeterminate tomatoes with the long stems, those stems are coming from those suckers?
Yes, correct. They could be coming from the bottom, but suckers are going to form anywhere between a stem and the leaf axil. It's just going to keep going and going. This concrete rebar reinforcing wire, great for tomatoes, terrible for your hands. They don't come with a tetanus shot. Where do they store them? They So should they stay for small sprawl? You could let your tomatoes grow all over the ground. We did that one year, and that was the last year we did it. I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore. You're going to have fewer, if you stake them, you're going to have fewer fruits than if they sprawled on the ground. That's how the growers do it. They just sprawl on the ground and they come through and pick them. But if you stake them, at least you can see if there's a tomato hornworm on there. They're not going to be rotting on the ground. I'll always try to have your, whether it's a bush tomato or an indeterminate, have some sort of stake. I know we're running out of time here. Let me just go through 400 more pictures. All right, here, so here, staked, metal stake, yes.
How do you keep the squirrels away from?
That's an excellent, yeah, a barrier. You're gonna have to put some kind of netting around there because they are terrible. They go and it's like, hey, look at this one, take a bite, throw it down. Look at this one, take a bite. Oh yeah, BB gun. No, I'm kidding. So, there are some beautiful tomato plants, newer varieties. There's a lot of purple tomatoes. There are many newer varieties. This is an example of the plant doesn't read the book. This was at my mother's townhouse many years ago. I put in this midnight snack tomato. I think my brother grew this from a seed. This was the worst soil I'd ever seen because the construction crew just dug it, put all the clay back. I think I put a bag of compost around it. This plant performed better than any in my garden that I've been, working on for years. Midnight snack, that's what I harvested off of there. It's indeterminate, it kept going up and over her deck. These were not ripe until they were kind of red. If you pick them when they're purple, it's like eating a green tomato. But there's some beautiful purple and red tomatoes out there. Again, you can do a lot in a little area. These are little red currant tomatoes. So if you've got the space, you want to try different tomatoes, they're about 10 or so on a spoon. They're also called spoon tomatoes, currant tomatoes. I'm going to go through here because I know we're running out of time. Heirloom tomatoes. I think even the Jewel Osco tent nowadays is selling heirlooms. These are plants introduced more than 50 years ago. And when you save the seeds of those heirlooms and you plant that seed the next year, what you see is what you get. If you take a seed of a brand new cultivar where the parents are from different tomatoes, you're not going to get the same seed. So heirlooms in general, you save the seed, you plant the next year, you get it's like a Xerox. Does anyone say Xerox anymore? I don't know. Brandywine, this is another one. This is a beautiful heirloom tomato. But having said that, great flavor, very susceptible to disease. I would never plant all heirlooms because they are so susceptible to bacterial and fungal diseases. Here's a newer cultivar, Juliet. You see these a lot now in the garden centers in the spring. It's kind of an elongated cherry tomato, very disease resistant. Summer squash is another one. Like in May 1st, I'll plant those seeds outside. We could have a frost May 15th, but they'll germinate in a week. And then within 55 days from the time they germinate, start picking these squash. Pick them when they're little, not the size of a baseball bat. When they're little and your fingernail makes a mark and then the seeds are little, the skin is tender. And let me just go back. Look at all the different varieties. Don't grow what you can just get at the Jewel very easily. Try some different varieties that you haven't grown before. Male and female flowers on cucumbers and squash. This flower in the right-hand side, the long stem is a male. The males tend to come out first and like, hey, ladies, I'm here. They're all waiting. And then the females show up like a few days later. And so you need a bee to go from that male flower to the female flower and move that pollen. So if you've got a lot of flowers and no fruit, you may not have the pollinators. So you see that picture on the right, there's a little bulb here. Usually the female flowers on cucumbers or squash already have a tiny bulb right here. It's the unpollinated fruit is already starting to form. So, if you're not getting fruits, but you have flowers, hire some kid in the neighborhood with a paintbrush to go from the male to the female flower and pollinate them. They've got a lot of time on their hands. Here are cucumbers. This is just, you could grow these on a trellis. They make nice collapsible trellises. The nice thing about growing cucumbers up and off the ground, you don't have to worry about rot. The pollinators can get to the flowers. Here in this urban garden, they've got a trellis panel. You can buy those at the big box stores, that white, usually made out of mesh. But in front of this, I'd be growing some dill. If you want to make dill cucumbers or basil, whatever. But you're growing these up, it's so easy to see. And then if you want to pick the cucumbers when they're small and tender, they're right there. And it makes a lot of use of the room. Bush beans, 55 days from the time that you sow them. So in May, by the time they germinate, so 2 months basically, bush beans are going to perform for about 2 weeks, and then they're sort of done. Each row is done. We always used to grow bush beans and pole beans. Pole beans take longer because they've got to travel higher, but they're going to produce way longer than bush beans. So that's something to think about. And pole beans don't take up all the space. Here's a great heirloom pole bean, Kentucky Wonder. You could probably buy these seeds in the Jewel next spring. 70 days from the time they germinate, they don't need pollinators. That's another thing. So if we're short on pollinators, you hear that in the news. Kentucky Wonder pole bean has been around forever. It's good for freezing, eating fresh. I want to show you just this example of staking. This was up at Cantini in Wheaton in the Idea Garden. I just love the way they took these bamboo stakes, stuck them in the ground about 6 or 8 inches, formed teepees with twine, and then reinforced them with this crossbar. It's really an elegant, inexpensive, very versatile way you can grow sweet peas, pole beans, some smaller miniature pumpkins could grow on there, the little white ghost pumpkins that are 2 inches wide. Bell peppers, another one, takes about 70 days from the time the plants go in the ground. I do not grow California Wonder because that kind of a tasteless green pepper you can get at the Jewel. Instead, Big Bertha, Menards had these in flats. This is an elongated bell pepper. All these bell peppers eventually turn red or orange or yellow, depending on the cultivar. But this is in my brother's urban, city of Chicago backyard. Nice long pepper. So if you're stir frying, you want to slice them real thin, really nice and blocky. I really like this one. It's got a really nice taste. Here's another eggplant. Who cooks with eggplant? Just a handful. This is another great plant. I'm not talking about the big eggplants that are, the big round lobed ones that have been sitting in, Mariano's or Jewel or whatever for a week. You don't know how long they were there. These are compact plants. This one called Fairy Tale, an Asian eggplant, long, slender. You can slice them real thin, fry them. Bake, cook with them, roast them, whatever. But grow something different. Look at the ones on the right, how beautiful these are. If you are going to the grocery store to buy them, you want to try some recipes, look for the ones that have a real shiny skin. Once you see those eggplants that are sort of dull looking, they're done. They're going to taste, the inside looks like sofa foam. And here, look how beautiful. Glossy and thin. The skin should be real glossy. How beautiful is that? It's just a gorgeous vegetable. So late summer, I think about October 15th or so, we could have a frost. So I start backing up. When can I start sowing my lettuce again? If it takes a week to germinate and 3 weeks to harvest, I'm looking at like September 15th or earlier. Because what's happening after the June 21st, the summer solstice, we're losing daylight every day. So I try to work that in. So May 15th, the last spring frost date, sort of, October 15th. Those are the 2 dates that I'm looking at all the time. And I'm counting backwards or forwards from when can I sow the seeds, how long does it take to germinate, how long does it take before I can harvest. So a calendar is real handy. And here, frost blanket. It's like heavy polyester, and here my husband one year was covering up the Swiss chard in November. So that just stayed over until the next morning when we take that off. So, this is row cover, it's more lightweight, but what this does is increase the air temperature around the plants, like 3 to 5 degrees. So, I don't use a lot, I use very few chemicals, and this is from World War II. Look at this poor grasshopper, he's trying to drill, he's drilling into the tomato. If you can, cover your cabbages and so on to keep the insects out, it's a barrier. I use insecticidal soap once in a while, but usually what I'm doing is, if I'm growing cucumbers up, I take a pail of soapy dishwater. I just put a few drops in, suds it up. I go out there, I look under the leaves, knock the squash bugs right into the bucket. I'm not out there spraying or using chemicals, things like that, because the whole reason of growing your own food is to have something that's organic. So does companion planting work? I just want to show you this. There's a lot of information about it. If you plant this next to this, it's going to get rid of the insects. This is a flea beetle. It's about 1/16 of an inch long, and it can make Swiss cheese out of your eggplant leaves. It can put 1 million holes in there. So here's an example of companion planting where they put flowers into repel flea beetles. This is eggplant, lots of holes. So I take these things with a grain of salt about companion planting. I know there's books out on that now. But I put flowers in the vegetable garden anyway because I want to bring pollinators in, especially blue flowers, because bees are attracted to blue. Bees are real. If you noticed, if you had blue salvia in your garden this summer, fall, the bumblebees were there. They are super attracted to blue. And so here, these are in our garden, bumblebee, honeybee, and the salvias. So someone was talking about the insects and the squirrels. This is a garden in LaGrange. You can buy this plastic netting, but you're going to have to create that kind of a barrier where they either can't crawl up and it's got to be draped over the top. But at least you're going to have something to harvest. Or you can acquire a taste for squirrel. Just kidding, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, we're almost done here before you get kicked out. All right, here, I just want to show you, this is my brother's backyard, a typical urban backyard. There's pots of pepper stuck in here. You wouldn't know that, but there's a lot of flowers in here. There's big pots of pepper plants in there. The side yard, this is a side yard by his house, and it gets afternoon shade, and the peppers do really well. They get morning sun, so the plants don't read the book. They don't necessarily know 6 to 8 hours of sun. They're still performing in this shaded situation early in the summer. Here's just a couple of other ideas, side yards, raised beds or trellises. Make the most of your space. And then this was a garden out in Will County. I just thought this is, your vegetable garden or the little area where your growing plants can be extremely artistic. That's raised beds, whether it's pots, obelisks, whatever. Make your vegetable garden not just a vegetable garden, but add some flowers in there and some other elements, and enjoy that, especially the flowers, because you can cut those and bring them in for your table. To me, that's part of the whole thing, of growing organically, cooking something unusual, and then the flowers or herbs. Right now, I'm cutting the last of the sage, the rosemary, and I'm going to use that as part of my table decorations for Thanksgiving. So I'm going to stop right there.